Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flannelgraph Present. I'm your host, John Moline. Last time we were together, we looked at least the first 2 out of 8 steps of presenting a Flannelgraph story. I want to talk to you today about step 3. First 2 steps, of course, are prayer, and then to give an introduction to your story, giving them information, biblical information, that's not actually in your story. Step 3 is to actually tell the story. So in today's time together, I want to talk to you about just a few things that I kind of call Flannelgraph basics, all right? In presenting a Flannelgraph story, there's some things that you need to keep in mind. Our digital visuals will be so helpful for this. It'll show you where to place your figures. In the scripts, there are those little arrow icons that actually show you where in the story you put the actual figure and what figures that you use. Now, some things which are really helpful in presenting any Flannelgraph story. Number 1, when you're doing Flannelgraph, you're certainly not going to stand here, right? Why? Because you want them to see the story. Yes, they're going to see you, they're going to hear you, and we're going to talk about actual storytelling technique and some things which will help you to tell a memorable story in our next video. But presenting a Flannelgraph story, now I'm left-handed, which means that I place my figures on the board from the right side as opposed to the left side. If you're right-handed, which most of you probably are, you'll be telling your stories from that side of the board. You want to keep yourself to the side, but something else that you want to keep in mind. When you place your figures on the board, go ahead and take your time, try and put them in the right position, and then just move off to the side and continue with your story. Actually interact with the board. You don't always have to be looking out here. If you're looking at the board and you're telling your story, they'll also be looking at the board. Let this be, as I call it, don't just make a pretty picture and then tell a story. No, this is a 2-dimensional play. There are figures that go on the board. There's figures that then come off the board. You put them in the right progression. Something else I want to talk about, the positioning of your figures. Hopefully, if I've done this correctly, and I believe I have, these figures should look like they're straight up and down, okay? What happens if you get them off a little bit? So it looks like the figure is leaning. It creates a tension in your audience. Children, youth, it doesn't make any difference. They're going to stop listening to you. They're going to stop being impacted by the biblical story because the only thing that they can hear in their mind is, that doesn't look right. That's not right. Practice at home where to put these figures. In this particular story, the placement of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is very, very critical. What happens if you get this tree too low? If you haven't practiced at home, you say, well, it doesn't really make any difference where this tree goes. Your story is going to go along fine in the first part. When you place the serpent on the tree, that looks okay. But if it's too low, what's going to happen when you place the woman? Well, if you want to make it look like she's actually having a conversation with the serpent, she's too low. If you put it out here, it doesn't look as natural. So use the resources that we have. Get the Genesis digital series. You'll be able to see in relationship to the other figures on the board where you need to place this so it can happen naturally. When you place your figures, place them straight up and down. You can usually just kind of run your hand over it and smooth it out. And your Flannelgraph board is naturally tilted back a little bit, so your figures are actually kind of laying on the board. They shouldn't fall off. If they do, don't panic. Lean down, pick them up, put your story back together, and simply continue. Whatever you do, they're going to stick with you. They're going to keep going with you. Practice putting your figures on and off the board so you know where they go. Very, very important. Use the resources that we have and put every single scene together. Some of the stories, the scenes actually change. Practice that. Figure out the best way to do that. All right? Sometimes you may actually need a helper to help you in that transition. I've told stories and sometimes trained a helper to actually have the figures for me, and they place the figures on the board, and I simply relax, and I'm the storyteller. That's wonderful if you can have that. Something else that you can do, and I love to do, especially with kids. Sometimes when I start, I will take my figures and I will hand my figures out to children that are there and tell them, listen, you need to pay really special attention because when it's your time to put a figure on the board, I'm going to let you know what that is. And they come up and they place the figure on the board. Boy, that really keeps their attention as they go through the story. So just a few things about Flannelgraph basics. Take your time. Make sure that you know where your figures are supposed to go. When you place your figures on the board, make sure they're straight up and down. All right? Know what your transitions are going to be. It's going to take some time. Learn to be comfortable with that. Flannelgraph basics, standing to the side and actually interacting with the story, not just interacting with the audience. But if you interact with your board and you interact with the story, they'll be paying attention to your board as well, and they'll be putting that story in their mind, and it'll be very, very memorable. Speaking of memorable stories, that's what we're going to discuss next time we get back together. Some points on how to tell a story that not only they can see, but they'll remember even long after the storytelling and the presentation is done. We'll cover that next time on Flannelgraph Presents. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.